Thank you, Chair. Colleagues, participants, and friends, it is not tolerable, it is not possible that from so much death, so much sacrifice and ruin, so much heroism, a greater and better humanity shall not emerge. Those were the words said by the General and President of the Republic, Charles de Gaulle. What is the nature of the foreign fighter threat in Sweden? Well, let's start by the figures, the number. How many are they? Today, it's exactly 286 foreign fighters that traveled to Syria and Iraq. About 120 have returned, and so far about 40 have been reported dead. And as you can see, the figures that is on the slide is already outdated. And I sent this slide about 1 month ago. What is happening now is that we are taking back the perimeter. We're countering them. We're contesting them on ground. And that means that they are returning back home, our own foreign fighters. That's why this number on the returner is going to increase rapidly in the coming months. Why should we worry? Well, we know that they will have a low barrier against violence, against the use of violence. We also know that they're highly motivated, trained, and also very experienced. We know that there is a potential high risk for severe damage if terrorist attacks are carried out by the foreign fighters. We also know that homegrown radicalization is being inspired by the foreign fighters. There is also emerging a kind of a deadly cocktail of inspired autonomous jihadist groups, lone actors, and train-the-trainer phenomena, being inspired by the foreign fighters. If you look upon the political parameter in Sweden, we do have a very polarized political environment today, a very polarized political debate. And there is a potential risk of trigger effects on right-wing extremism, left-wing extremism, and jihadism. And as you know, they nurture each other. That is one perspective. The other perspective also that we have a very strong focus on identities, as Mr. Power presented yesterday. On one hand, on the other hand, we have a diminishing social cohesion. We have questions concerning the social contract between the citizens and the society. What about the risk assessment? Well, the foreign fighter increases the risk for terror attacks in Sweden to become more likely and with a moderate to major impact. If we look upon the nexus, we need to have the background very, very clear when talking about the situation in Sweden. Many of you have heard about IKEA, Astrid Lindgren, Pippi Långstrump, Ingmar Stenmark, Björn Borg, you know, all the honey, all the sugar, all the stability, all the good things. The background is that in 2030, we had about 250 shootouts in Sweden, in our suburbs. In 2040, we had about 210 shootouts. So far in 2015, exactly 46 persons have been killed in shootouts in Sweden. We have about 55 no-go zones. That means that the police forces, many of you are police officers, you need to have special structure mission before you get into these fields, into these areas, into these perimeters. That is the situation in Sweden today. Then you can think about the nexus. Then you can think about these guys and some of women also coming back to Sweden. So how are we addressing the problem? We have two strategies, one to counter violent extremism and one to counter terrorism. The security agencies are very good on information sharing. They are having a very high capability and capacity. They are working fine, very good indeed. But when it comes to local government, where in fact 80% of all welfare, 80% of all public common decisions are taken on local government level in Sweden. It's a very highly decentralized society. The local government is characterized by low awareness, low competence, and a lack of cooperation. So the main actors so far are in fact the security police, the military intelligence, the fusion center, NCT, and so on. We are trying to get municipalities into this work, and it's starting to be a shift, but still they are not on, on the track. We have some legal instruments today, but they are mainly focused on genocide, crime of war, and crimes against humanity. We've been far too late to put forward the relevant instruments on how to combat and how to deal with terrorism. Today, we are outlining new legislative proposal to criminalize financing, organizing, or in other ways support for terror traveling. And also, of course, strict prohibition against participation in a terror organization while fighting in an armed conflict. This legislation will be in place in April 2016. So it's kind of light. But also realizing that this is a problem that's going to grow in the future. So better late than sorry, kind of, but still. So what are the key challenges involved? Strategic influence is in fact crucial. It's about storytelling. It's about the retold and or self-experienced grievances. It's retold stories that will kind of outlive persons, networks, organizations. It's a social heritage, in fact. It's adaptive, it's sustainable, it goes from generation to generation. Kind of, people come and go, ideas will outlive them all. In Sweden, we have very specific areas, for example, where we used to have Nazis in the 1920s. Now it's their grandsons, sons, and sons, and so on, continue with the same, now becoming neo-fascists and neo-Nazis. And of course, we have the same thing when it comes to Yadis in our suburbs. It's kind of a family tradition. This is a complex problem, but it's absolutely not complicated. You need to remember that. It's definitely handleable. You can deal with it. Some other factors that we often talk about is, of course, the mixture of failing education system, unemployment, social deprivation, etc., in marginalized areas. These are often relevant factors, but not always. One really needs to bear that in mind. It's not always. This is not always the case. We also have, as I mentioned, the polarized political debate. It makes a difference. It do inflect upon these problems. We have a political discourse that is very much in line with the Al-Qaeda strategy, the Daesh strategy, the Muslim Brotherhood strategy, about showing how West and the Muslim world is in conflict. We need to counter that picture, counter that discourse. But it's a very alive discourse in our society today. We also have what we call a view corridor. Another word is political correctness. That means that it kind of fuels conspiracy theories among those who are not in the corridor. And it kind of fosters reactions, both on the right, especially on the right-wing side. And we also have public financing of the wrong organizations, the organizations that really hate us. State government paying grants to civil society that are, in fact, polarizing the society. Those money come domestically from the government, but also abroad. And perhaps what happened now in Middle East could be summarized as what goes around comes around. So, best practices. Well, the first best practice is, of course, do not be late. And it kind of goes without saying in this group. We all know this. But politics not often realize or not often really want to look upon this as an urgent matter. They can say it's urgent, but they have a problem to really realize how urgent it is. So what are the recommendations? I would say they could be summarized in 3 words: conduct, define, and decide. That means you need to conduct a strategy and an action plan. You need to define the end state. What are you looking at the end of the pipe? What are the conditions you want to fulfill? What do you want to reach? What are the goals? What are the society you want to have in the end of this story? That means that you need to decide the definition of terrorism conducted by the foreign fighters. And here are some examples of what you can do. So the framework of this strategy is mostly proactive, but it's also reactive. And one of the first things you need to do, of course, is to predict and detect those in risk of becoming foreign fighters. That's the first thing. Second, you need to detect and prevent individuals from becoming foreign fighters and inspiring others. And then you need to take care of these legislative pieces that we're dealing with now in Sweden. And there are mainly 3 parts that we're dealing with, as you can see from the slides. Then you need to contest the space and redirect the conversation. To be very frank about it, in a society, there can only be one ruler on the ground, and that's the government. And when the government allows 55 no-go zones, then the government is not fulfilling its role. So kind of boots on the ground, take the perimeter, hold the perimeter. And we have a long travel to do that in Sweden now. It's a lot of lost space. It's a lot of lost perimeters. You also need to delegitimize the foreign fighters. And that can be done by many ways. For example, you have the Amnesty reports, what's happening now in Syria, in the Levant. You have the UN reports. You will have, sooner or later, we will have, sooner or later, criminal reports, conviction reports, etc. Make them public. Show them in front of the society who they are. Thirdly, you need to respond to those coming back so that they may be reintegrated to the society. As long as we have a penalty system that allows people to get out sooner or later, well, you need to integrate them, at least try to. So what could we do? Well, we need to respond with very targeted, precise actions, very individual, targeted actions. No mass action. This is very, very personal actions that we need to deal with. Oh, that we need to put in. At the end of this story, we need to find, and probably if we could have done this in the very beginning of the story, there wouldn't have been any foreign, or very, perhaps fewer foreign fighters. There would have been foreign fighters anyway, but perhaps fewer. And that's about exit. Priority to find a new life project, something that makes sense, something that makes meaning of life. It's a feeling of kind of social and emotional belonging, social cohesion. Sweden is a very secular and individualistic society. Researchers even call it state individualism. And that means that as an individual in Sweden, you're depending on absolutely nobody else, not your family, no one else than the government and the insurance system. So what will you do if you are looking for a social and emotional belonging in a society where the state and the government, and I know I'm very pushing this question now, is more like an insurance system, that the values, well, they are there, but you don't reflect upon them. You really don't reflect upon how good your life is, how well-functioning the system is. It's just there, you know. It's like the goldfish. If you would ask a goldfish, how is the water? The goldfish would say, what water? You know, you're used to it. You don't reflect upon it. So if you're looking for social and emotional belonging, well, someone will offer you the alternative. And that's exactly what happened with these individuals. Someone is offering them a social and emotional belonging. So we also need to pursue those foreign fighters that have committed crimes. And the focus here should be on what I call the whole flow of logistic justice. It's kind of a massive mission. If we talk about it in kind of military terms, we would say that we would have a combination of direct assault as well as flanking them out and moti them up and kind of neutralize them. When I say those words, I mean to transfer it to in legal terms. You need to deal with these individuals in the same way, but in a total, massive legal way, in kind of prosecution terms. So finally, or fifthly, you need to recover. And I think the Brits probably put the right word on it. In their contest strategy, number one, they said that we need to go on with our ordinary lives. Because the day we don't do that, that's the day when the terrorists kind of won their point. So, finally, to sum up, the success of this strategy really relies on the political will to deliver, to understand and to deliver. We need to focus on the proportionality. If it's not broken, don't fix it. We need to have direct, precise actions. We also need to remember what's been said several times here. We are strong and they are weak. That's why they're terrorists. The only way to become strong should be via our institutional systems. That should be the incitament. That should be the drivers for individuals. Not outside the system, within the system. So finally, I am convinced that a greater and better humanity is emerging every day. And we here, we got the tool in our hands, and we also got the responsibility to use them. Thanks for listening.